If you are not outside, then something else must be true. Something that does not fit the way you have been thinking. Because if you are not outside, then what you are reading is not something you are approaching. It is something you are already within. Now stay with that. Because if that is true, then the question changes completely. It is no longer, what does this mean? It becomes, what is actually happening? Not in theory. Not in explanation. But in reality. Because something is happening. Not just in the text. Not just in history. But in the structure itself. And until that structure is seen, everything will continue to feel fragmented. You may know the parts. Creation. The fall. Israel. Christ. The church. The end. You may recognize all of them. You may understand how they are usually explained. But knowing the parts is not the same as seeing the structure. Because parts can be known without ever forming a whole. And when they do not form a whole, they cannot become something you live within. They remain separate. And when they remain separate, they behave like information. You can move between them. You can study them. You can organize them. But you cannot remain in them. This is why everything feels disconnected. Not because it is disconnected, but because it has not yet been seen as a whole. Now let's step back. Not into explanation, but into observation. What do you actually see when you stop focusing on the parts? Not the details, not the doctrines, not the individual passages, but the movement. Because something is moving. Not randomly, not loosely, but consistently. Listen carefully. From the very beginning. In the beginning, there is life. Not abstract. Not symbolic. Life. There is no distance. No separation. No effort to connect. Everything is already within. And then something changes. Not gradually. Not subtly. But decisively. Separation. Now everything shifts. Distance appears. Relationship breaks. movement begins. And from that moment, everything that follows moves in response to that separation. History unfolds, not as disconnected events, but as a response. Now, listen again. Not to the details, but to the pattern. Life. Separation. Everything that follows is movement toward restoration. Not all at once, not in a straight line, but consistently. Return. Restoration. Reconnection. And eventually, life again. Now stop. Because this is not a summary. This is structure. Life. Separation. Restoration. Life. This is not one story. This is the pattern that everything follows. And once you see it, you begin to recognize it everywhere. Not only in the Bible, but in your own experience. Because this is not just what happened. It is what is happening. Right now. This is why everything changes when structure is seen. Because you are no longer moving between disconnected parts. You begin to see movement. And movement is what creates reality. Now go back again to what you experienced. That moment of clarity. That moment where something aligned. What if that moment was not random? What if it was the moment you stopped seeing parts and briefly saw structure? Not completely. Not fully. But enough that everything held together. And then it faded. Not because the structure disappeared, but because you returned to seeing parts. This is why it does not remain. Because structure is not maintained by effort. It is recognized. And once it is recognized, it does not need to be held together. It holds itself. Now everything begins to shift. You are not trying to understand more. You are learning to see differently. Not adding. Not collecting. Seeing. Because once you see the structure, everything changes. Not instantly. Not dramatically. But steadily. Quietly. Because now, when you read, you are no longer looking for isolated meaning. You are watching movement, and movement cannot be fragmented. Now everything begins to connect. Creation is no longer just a beginning. It is life. The fall is no longer just an event. It is separation. Christ is no longer just a doctrine. He is restoration. And suddenly, everything belongs. Not because you forced it, but because you saw it. Now the question changes again. If this is the structure, then why does it still feel fragmented? And that is what we need to see next.